A lot of times anger comes out at us. And the neat thing about anger, I don't know if it's so neat, actually. I said that and I went, no, it's not. It's not neat. But it's really, psychologists will tell us it's a secondary emotion. And so there's something underneath it.
Right.
And exploring that with somebody, if you can dig into that and be an adult in that way versus being afraid. So you choose to show up as the grown up and find out what's really going on here.
All right. Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to be talking about how to handle anger, even if it's scary or overwhelming to you. So, So Nina, anger is a hot topic.
Yeah, for like everybody. And if we don't deal with it, it can really mess up our families. You know, the anger we have, the anger of other people. So we need to deal with this, and nobody wants to. And that's me sometimes too, right?
Yeah, I definitely run in the other direction when I see it. And I know that has not worked. So I'm really interested in finding out what does work. So yeah.
Yeah. So I have to tell a little story that just blows me away. This woman that she was a class member years ago. And it's one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. Her husband was very volatile in his communication style, probably even what is called verbal abusive. Okay. Verbally aggressive at the very least. And his behavior was terrifying. He's a really big guy. And she decided she was done with that. And he's letting her have it over something one day. And she left the conversation and she said, you know what? This isn't good for our relationship. And I love you. So I'm going to take a break and I'm going to come back. And he didn't like that. And she ended up having to lock herself in the bedroom because he followed her. So she locks herself in the bedroom. He's pounding on the door and she just stayed in there. She was quiet. He gave up. He went downstairs and he's sitting in the chair rocking in this rocking chair, and she goes over to him. She gets on her knees in front of him, takes his hand in her hands, and she starts rubbing the palm of his hand, and she says, you know, I appreciate these hands and how hard they work for our family. And when you spoke to me earlier today, you raised your hand at me, and I don't ever want to be afraid of these hands. I want them to be an instrument of love in our family. And he didn't know what to do with that, but he hugged her, they connected, and he didn't do that again. He started working on his stuff. And the neat thing about that is she said no to it, right? And so in the equation, somebody has to stop the damage. And so point number one would be act like an adult. Because it's 2-year-olds having temper tantrums, right? You've had a few little people doing that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, and you're still tempted to match that when you're seeing it coming at you, but as the adult, yeah, somebody has
Mm-hmm.
to have mature behavior in here.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's interesting because really it's the same thing when you're dealing with an adult that you would do with a toddler, right?
Yeah, because in that moment, they're acting like, and me too, okay, we're that age in that moment.
Right.
We haven't matured out of that space. Where usually it's because of some wounding from our childhood. We haven't grown up yet in that space. And so we'll get triggered. A lot of times anger comes out at us. And the neat thing about anger, I don't know if it's so neat, actually. I said that and I went, no, it's not. It's not neat. But it's really, psychologists will tell us it's a secondary emotion. And so there's something underneath it.
Right.
And exploring that with somebody, if you can dig into that and be an adult in that way versus being afraid. So you choose to show up as the grown up and find out what's really going on here.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was imagining is the same way that you take that toddler and you sit with them and you ask them questions and you bring that calm to the room is the same thing that the lady did in your story, and just taking his hand and being the calm in the middle of that storm. And so yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I know that I've acted out like that as well. And when people are in the room that are calm and rational, it's like a breath of fresh air, right? It's like it makes it even more obvious when you're the one that's out of control.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to do a lot of traveling, and you'd see people at the gate who were 15 shades of purple upset, right? Because of something with their flight. And what was amazing is and I didn't do this a lot, but sometimes I felt led to step into that space when they're coming back. I didn't interfere with their conversation with the agent. But I was like, hey, that's really rough for you right now, isn't it? I bet you really wanted to go see your grandkids. I'm so sorry this happened to you today. And they go from this physical revved up thing to, yeah, I mean, it's like whoosh, you can almost just like a deflating balloon, the anger just gets out of there. And what they're feeling underneath that is usually some kind of emotional pain.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that's really insightful information, because I think if you're like me, when you see anger, your first uh, interpretation isn't that person's in pain. It's
Mhm.
that person's mad. And so I think it's very intuitive to take note of that could possibly be the equivalent of what is tears for that person. It's
Mhm.
coming out, in an uncontrollable way.
Yeah. Well, and I think, in our culture, because men are raised with big boys don't cry, act like a man, and it's not cool for them to have tears and have their emotions explored as children. And culturally, people don't know what to do with that. Then they shut it up in men. I was at a coffee shop and I watched these two little kids, boy and a girl, about the same age. The little boy fell over in his chair. The whole chair, he's got his feet up and the chair falls over. And the mom goes over and she picks him up and she's like, okay, that's all right. Sit down. You're all right. Sit down. And then the little girl, 10 minutes later, did the same thing. She's like, oh, are you okay? Did you bump your head? And I'm like, oh, oh. And then as adult women, we get frustrated if we raised our kids this way. We just created angry men. I mean, they have to have their emotions recognized, dealt with. Men and women are really not that different in terms of, the big five personality index. There's a few differences, but we really feel the same things. It's just men get less training on that, and they don't know as anybody wouldn't know what to do with that when they're an adult. And so, yeah, it's hard. It shows up as anger. And so if we recognize that, and we can step into it differently, and we need to recognize it in ourselves too.
For sure. And sometimes that anger is not loud. Sometimes it's the silent treatment,
Mhm.
or it's punishment, or it's seething, or it's frowning, and that's really still anger,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know? Pent up.
Yeah, one of my kids told me one time, Mom, you're mad. I'm like, I'm not mad. And he goes, tell your face. Tell your face. Like, oh,
Right?
wait. Yeah, I am okay. What is that about? And then you go do these steps with the father and figure out what is it in me that's mad at a 7-year-old. What really, really? Come on. Anyway.
So one of the things you also talk about a lot is managing expectations. I know sometimes when there's expectations, that means you're setting yourself up for something called disappointment, which can show up in anger. So, how can managing our expectations help us?
Yeah, that is a very powerful thing to think about. when we have an expectation, and I'm going to upset people when I say this, when we have an expectation, we're basically setting ourselves up for a future resentment if things don't work out. And so when we also think the best of somebody and have a hope that they're going to, perform well or do the right thing, we have to be detached from that. It's because it's healthy and really good for relationships to think the best about other people and communicate that. And you give them like Dale Carnegie said, a fine reputation to live up to. But the thing is everybody's human, right? So if I'm emotionally attached to that expectation, I am going to be disappointed. And so in that space, if I don't manage it, and I have to be careful, am I okay if this person doesn't do that thing? And if I'm not, what is it in me that needed that person to perform or act a certain way so that I could be okay? Why am I not okay? Because that's an identity issue.
Right. So basically, it comes back to us in the end. So it's either you do the work up front and manage that expectation, or it shows up in your disappointment, which basically brings you back to managing yourself anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we can't get away from ourselves. Everywhere I go, there I am.
that's true. I just want to qualify something because there are going to be those listeners out there that say, well, it's not wrong to have a goal. It's not wrong to have a desire. Well, yeah, there's a difference between having a desire and having an expectation. And I think the secret is what you said, which is to detach from the outcome, essentially. Am I
Yeah.
correct in saying that?
Yeah, and you're spot on with that because everybody wants to have a great marriage, right? Everybody wants to be a great parent and have kids that love them when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, right? And the reality is that we're not perfect.
Right.
So we can hope for that. We can look for that. But if we're attached to that and then we're not okay if that's not happening, that says a lot about us. And if we're putting on the mind of Christ, if we're listening to the him inside of us and being motivated and spurred on by the Holy Spirit, there's a pointing out of immaturity when we're disappointed or angry or whatever, because you can, and this is the part that people don't get. You can have a healthy thought about something, it could go this way, and that person can disappoint you. But the level of disappointment, if it makes you not be okay, then that's what needs to be looked into. But there may be a boundary that needs to be put into place. I mean, it makes me half nuts when people say, well, grace means you just ignore everybody's stuff. And the reality is, you do a lot of that because the more mature you are as a Christian, the less all this stuff affects you. I mean, for real, you can just love and it doesn't bother you. But that doesn't mean it. You then have the objectivity to go, yeah, I think I need to create a boundary here for my son because every time he brings my car back, it's full of garbage and McDonald's hamburger, all this stuff. And you're not disappointed in him. You're not emotional about it. It's not about you because none of your identities are wrapped up in that. But you still have these actions because you hoped he would bring your car back nice and clean, and he didn't. So, what's the outcome of that? There needs to be one sometimes.
That's right. And it really is love to give somebody a place to come up higher. So there's grace in that as well.
Yeah, that's a huge point, Shai, that most people don't understand, that it is loving to call people to a higher level of being. And nobody likes to do that. Or maybe some people, I don't know anybody that enjoys that actually, because it's usually around, it can be very hard. It's kind of like people avoiding conflict and stuff, because a lot of times that is conflictual. But if we don't do that, if we don't interact in anger, and I think that's the big point for today, if we don't interact with other people's anger and our own, we're basically saying, this is okay in the culture that I'm creating in my family, my workplace, whatever. This is okay. It's not okay. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and even slower to become angry. You know, anger is foolish behavior. So we need to stop acting like a fool and grow up, act like an adult. So, and that's a hard thing to hear, especially when there's wounding, but I get it. I've been there.
Same. Okay, one of the other things that you say we need to do when we're dealing with anger is tap into our compassion and our empathetic side. Mm-hmm. Why is that important?
You can't reach somebody by matching their anger with retaliatory anger or being defensive. The only thing that works in those moments is compassion. If we're incapable of compassion, that means we have a thing within us that's sin that needs to be looked at. And you look at how Christ dealt with all the people that came to him that were sinners with obvious things. And he was compassionate to them, even on the cross. Forgive them, Father. They don't know what they're doing. I don't have that kind of compassion.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm working on this still. I'm still getting annoyed at people that cut me off on the freeway. So, that I don't have that full on, but you look at your kids and you can see somebody being angry and, emotive all over you. And it's that space that's there, the detachment that we talked about, but we have to make that choice, Lord. And I can't do it on my own. I have to ask, Lord, what are you seeing here? Yeah. And he brings something beautiful. He brings his love into that. And then my heart goes out to that person. And, I was talking to somebody yesterday who's got just ugly situation in her marriage. And everybody in her life is telling her to divorce her husband. And, she's got grounds, she's got all this stuff. And I asked her, I said, why are you still here? And she said, well, I feel like God has told me that I'm supposed to stay. And I said, okay. And she said, I can't give up on him. Wow. And I said, why is that? And she said, because Christ didn't give up on me. Wow. And then in the next breath, she said, I'm moving out and I'm taking the kids because he can't hear. He doesn't understand. And the behaviors he's in have to stop. And I know this is risky and I might lose it all. But what I'm doing now isn't working. And I've taken him to the elders at our church. Nothing is changing. So we're going to level up in this. And I just keep praying that the Lord will reach him through his loss of daily interaction with his kids and me. And she was crying as she's saying this, right? And I thought, wow, what an amazing woman that is. Yeah. Yeah. And I've talked to a number of leaders of mega churches, and they all say the same thing. The call of an elder is to really parent the adults in the congregation to help them level up. And men need to do that for other men so that they will show up in their families properly. But they don't do it in an aggressive, mean, judgmental way. It's with love. And that's how you know the Spirit's working, right? Because if you're losing your temper over something, you shouldn't be saying anything right now at all.
And it's like you said, we can't do it. This is really a working of the Holy Spirit that has to happen when you're dealing with hard things like that. I can't even imagine how hard that was for her to do, and to view it in the lens of she is really truly loving him at the highest level. That's that agape love, when you seek that person's highest good, even if it's painful for you and for them. Oh man, that only happens by the work of the Holy Spirit. I know for me, I can't just do that.
Yeah, I don't have it in me either, but he's in us. Yeah. Right. And our goal is to be transformed into the mind of Christ.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I want that. I think we all do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the last thing that I think is worth mentioning around anger is when there's fear. Um, sometimes anger can be scary, and it's not your first move to just move into it or move closer to it. So
Mm.
how can we step into that fear that we have?
Yeah, that's so I spent 15 years doing public speaking training, helping people overcome the fear of public speaking. And one of the things that we said was do it scared. Just
Mm.
do it. So it's in that moment when we choose to love, where we walk into somebody's 5 alarm hissy fit and we put a hand on the shoulder or reach. I had somebody do this to me. It was right after I became a Christian. I was so mad at one of my employees, and he called me on the phone and he's yelling at me. And another manager that actually worked for me was standing there listening to this. And I had the phone like out here, and he's just all over me. And I was furious, but I went, I'm not going to talk to you right now. And I hung up and I turned around and I was like this. And she was a Christian. She was a friend of mine, but she put her arms around me. And I was like, I didn't know what to do with it. Like I was short circuiting. But
Yeah.
then she rubbed my back, and I was like, okay. It all just melted away. Right. And so there's a couple of things with that. The physical touch element releases oxytocin, making eye contact in a loving way and holding it can release oxytocin. And if that person can't calm down, if that doesn't work, then we say, you know what, let's take a few minutes to go pray. And then let's talk about this.
Mm.
And that usually helps, believe it or not. But it's a choice
Yeah.
to do it scared. And people haven't known what to say and how to say it. But when I've brought that to men, I was on Family Life Today with Dennis Rainey and Bob Lepine, and I'm like, so here's this thing that we tell people to do. What do you think about it, guys? And they said, yes. If women would do that in their marriages when their husbands are angry, they need that touch, that eye contact, that love in that moment, because they're short circuiting or whatever word he used, and they don't know what to do. And so I was like, all right. So we kept telling people to do it. And I hear stories from women. This is terrifying, but I'm going to keep doing it. And 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times later, they're not scared anymore. They start out doing it scared because it is scary. Hello, they're bigger than we are, you know? Yeah. Be careful if you do this at work. Don't get yourself a sexual harassment suit or anything.
Right.
Yeah. Or in ministry, even, you gotta be careful if you're dealing with the opposite sex, but, choosing to step into it and be brave. I mean, they can't do anything to us.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and so the
Yeah.
fear is really tied to something from our childhood and our mother or father screaming at us when we were 6 or something.
Yeah.
So,
Well, now that's good. That's a whole other thing right
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
You can't step into it. That really is about you anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, people are probably tired of me saying it's still about you.
go deal with it. Well, this has been so helpful. I really feel like anger isn't as scary as I did, before we started this. So thank you so much for those tips.
No, absolutely. Fun discussion today. And where can people find out more?
So if you want to learn more about anger and hurt and how to deal with it, visit our website at greaterimpact.org. There's a free ebook that you can download. And if you're interested, we can also offer coaching. So
All right.
thanks for joining us.